Well, first of all, inflation is going to get a lot worse.
Worse.
And if we still measured inflation the way we did 40 years ago, it'd be 15%, not 7.5%. And the rate hikes that they've proposed are completely inadequate. In fact, the Fed is intending to pursue an accommodative monetary policy. Even if they raise interest rates to 1 or 2%, that is highly accommodative. That's the same type of interest rates they had when inflation was below 2%. You've got inflation at 7.5%, even the way they measure it, and rising. The only way to put out this fire is to have positive real interest rates. The Fed needs to get above the inflation rate. We're not even going to get close. So they're going to continue to pour gasoline on the fire. And so the entire time the Fed is inching up rates, inflation is actually going to be moving higher. Inflation is going to be worse in 2022 than it was in 2021. And real interest rates are going to continue to fall even as the Fed raises nominal rates.
So, Peter, then what happens to the economy?
The economy is in a lot of trouble. It's massive stagflation. And the problem is people still don't recognize the box that the Fed put us in, because there is no interest rate that the Fed could put to fight inflation that the economy could withstand. If the Fed has to fight inflation, we not only have a massive recession and a crash in the stock market and the real estate market, but we have a much worse financial crisis than the one we had in 2008. See, the reason the Fed pretended that inflation was transitory when it obviously wasn't is because they have no ability to fight it. And now that they're no longer pretending that inflation is transitory, they're pretending that they're going to fight it when they can't.
So this can get really ugly is what you're saying. Larry, do you agree?
You know, I think Peter made some good points, but yeah, I don't agree per se in the sense that I really do believe that this is pandemic related, because if you remember before the pandemic, we were in a decade, if not more, of lower for longer. And maybe that was partly Fed induced, but I also think it's advance in technology. You have an aging society. Different changes in society itself that is causing things to be cheaper. And so we're just not used to this kind of inflation. This is a spike. I don't think the Fed is behind the curve. I mean, today definitely bolstered the argument for 50 basis points in March, but I'm still not in that camp. I still think they're going to have room to raise rates as necessary in between meetings. So I don't think we're in the dire straits that Peter thinks we are, although his points are well grounded and I've heard them before.
So rates rising even in between meetings, you think that's completely on the table? And I'm assuming you'd even recommend that, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, do you think...
Well, they need to raise rates... They need to raise rates right now. I mean, they need to stop quantitative easing. They need to start tightening and shrinking the money supply and removing all this liquidity. You know, the 10 years of low inflation that we had, we're about to pay the price for that, because the Fed kept creating inflation, printing money, and staring at the broken CPI and assuming that because the CPI wasn't having a reading that was above 2%, that they had the green light to create more inflation. Well, it works with a lag, and now we're catching up to all the inflation that we created over the past decade, and it's just starting to take hold. And we really dialed it up starting with the pandemic. That was the worst possible combination of monetary policy, because as we ordered people to stop working and people went home and were no longer producing goods and services, we gave them additional money to buy the stuff that nobody was producing. So we had even more money chasing fewer stuff. We have an inflationary tsunami, and we have barely even caught up to that. This is just getting started. You know, unlike the 1970s where we were ending inflation, we're just getting started. And the Fed is at zero. You know, and we have so much debt. We didn't have all this debt in 1980 when Paul Volcker allowed interest rates to go to 20%. I mean, what would happen to the economy given all the debt that we have if interest rates even went to 10%. I mean, what about 5%? We couldn't even handle 2.5% in 2018, and the economy is in much worse shape now with a lot more debt than it was then.
Yeah, I know. We're talking about getting to around 1%. Look, in that CPI print, Larry, gas up 40%, used cars up 40%, appliances up 10%, food up 7%, the most since 1981, and rent, which is a third of CPI, up about 4.5%. That's what we're facing. Those numbers are higher than that overall CPI print of 7.5%. So, you know, how bad is inflation really? And do you think now with this sell-off that we're getting today, we're starting to see rates going up, that mentality priced into the market, giving Fed flexibility basically to hike, and hike?
Yeah, and I think it's also testing the will of the Fed of like, can these kind of rate hikes, can the equity market actually sustain them? And I don't think the Fed is particularly concerned at this point with financial conditions the way they are, I should say, and the equity market the way it is today. I still think that a lot of these subsectors definitely were a little scary to read, but I took comfort in the fact that used cars, it was the lowest expansion we've had since September. It's starting to cool off, and new cars were basically unchanged, and hotels were actually down. So there's some good news in it, perhaps I'm only looking at the bright side of things, but I do think pre-pandemic, we didn't have this nuance. And Peter is right. There's a savings glut. We can't get money velocity to move, but I don't think that's a problem of the Fed. I think it's the fact that we're at a point now where the private sector can't multiply capital fast enough or even at all. So it's the public sector that's going to have to do it, unfortunately. So there's more and more reliance on the government.
There's not a savings glut. There's not a savings glut. There's a debt glut. That's the problem. Nobody's been saving. Everybody's been borrowing and spending. But rent.
How's
savings? Peter, finish your thought. Peter, finish your thought. Then Larry, you can respond.
Because
household savings
she said that, but rent
pandemic.
Let me.
All right.
Yeah, rent. According to the figures you just gave, rent is up 4%. Rent is up 3 or 4 times that much. The government is lying about rent. Yeah. That's a third of the CPI. They're using owner's equivalent rent. That number doesn't exist. Nobody pays that rent. If the government used actual rent or home prices, the number would be much higher, and that would reveal a much higher increase in the CPI. There is no way you can fight historically high inflation with 1% interest rates. 1% interest rates was the rate that Alan Greenspan slashed rates to in 2002 to stimulate the economy after the stock market bubble popped and we had that recession. You can't fight inflation with stimulative monetary policy. You need restrictive monetary policy. And no one's even talking about making money tight. All they're doing is talking about making it less loose. And you can't fight inflation with loose money.
Before we continue, help us clicking that YouTube like button and subscribe now to our channel. This shows the algorithm that you valued this information. And it helps us spread that message. Sharing is caring. And now, let's continue.
Do you want to know one thing about crypto? I made over 3,000% in profit in a few weeks. Fact is, the traditional financial system, the traditional money system makes you poor, not rich. If you want to earn $500,000, $1 million, you have to wait until you're 50, 60, 70 in the traditional financial system, and you probably will still be broke. And you will be old. This is not a sexy combination, as you can imagine. But the question is, how can you start in crypto and make these profits? Where to invest? Where to start? My name is Gunnar and I'm from Germany, as you can hear, and things are a little bit different in Germany. More about that later on. Fact is, there are lots of different cryptocurrencies. It's a gigantic universe where beginners and professionals get easily lost. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. There are 7 key steps you need to follow to become successful in this market. You have to know them, and if you fail one of them, it's literally impossible to succeed in this market. Just an example, one of the key points is your exchange, and one of the biggest are, for example, Binance and Coinbase. These are trusted and well-established exchanges, but, and this is a big but, you won't find the super profitable coins on those exchanges. The unknown super profitable coins that get gigantic profits are not traded on those kind of exchanges. They are traded on much smaller insider platforms that are barely known. And I can tell you what those super secret exchanges are and why they are so profitable. And another super important thing are the right information sources. The point is, the internet is gigantic. There are hundreds and hundreds of YouTube channels, blogs, pages, and much, much more. And there are also market makers and influencers. For example, Elon Musk, he is not a crypto guy, but the moment he recommended Dogecoin, it went through the roof, to the moon, so to say. But why did he recommend it? Where did he hear it from? He didn't hear it from newspapers. And believe me, he is listening to someone. But you have to know who, and you have to react before he is reacting. This is really, really important. And these are only 2 of the 7 steps you have to follow in order to be successful in crypto. And if you want to know all of these steps in much more detail, and if you want to have a comprehensive checklist, here's what you should do. There is a link below this video. Click on this link and you will get the opportunity to subscribe to my channel. Click on the link and you will see a video where I explain the next steps. So see you soon. Click on the link now. I'll see you there.